The federal government sets great store in the idea that we need to borrow and spend a large amount of money on infrastructure for reasons that they seem to go back and forth on. On the one hand, sometimes they say it's about short-term economic stimulus, sort of Keynesian style. More often of late, they've been talking about it in terms of long-term increasing productivity growth. And in the long term, we have a big problem in this country. Productivity has been growing very slowly. We don't have the rapid increase in the labor force that was fueling growth in recent decades. That's not going to be the case going forward as the population ages. So it's become a very important thing to raise productivity, because otherwise we're not going to be able to pay for our health care, for one thing. There is a halfway sensible argument that says that if you improve infrastructure, if you improve your roads and your bridges and other critical parts of infrastructure, that can relieve bottlenecks and ultimately pay off in higher productivity for the economy. But I think we want to be careful about just simply saying, well, it's infrastructure, let's spend. You also want to say, is this actually needed? Is this something that people are actually going to use? And one of the best tests for that is, would people pay to use it? Would they pay to cover the costs of providing it? That's a good sort of test of demand. We used to build things called roads and bridges. Then eventually we called them public works. Now we call them infrastructure. It's a sexier sounding name, I guess. And where it makes sense to borrow to build infrastructure is when things that are going to actually increase the productivity of the economy, because you get a payoff that helps you pay off the cost of the increased borrowing. There are other things that governments are now starting to call infrastructure that don't even fit that original definition. And for example, people are talking about social infrastructure, things like daycare centers. Now, I don't want to say for one second that there isn't value in building daycare centers, but if you're talking about borrowing to build things, you really want to be careful. Not everything should be borrowed for. Some things should be paid for out of current taxes. And the general rule that economists say is things that increase productivity, you might make a case for borrowing for. Things that are more in the nature of current consumption, you shouldn't borrow for. It's like borrowing to buy the groceries.